Welcome to Soltron. Today I wanted to do a definitive video of my custom tidal wave versus the Hasbro tidal wave. So right out the gate you can see there's a substantial difference between the bulk of my tidal wave versus the Hasbro tidal wave. So if we do a size comparison, mine is to the top of his head 23 inches. And then the Hasbro to the top of his head is about 18 and a half, which I would say here, I'm not really counting his little head crest. So 18 and a half versus 23 inches. So there's a good 5-inch difference about. And I think that is pretty noticeable, especially if we bring in some other Titans. Like compared to Metroplex, you could see that mine's a little bit bigger and bulkier, but the new tidal wave is definitely very small and dwarfed compared to Metroplex. Metroplex is a long and skinny Titan, of course, but yeah, the matchup of this guy against this guy, he's definitely out of his weight class. So I would say that's a point for my custom that he is so large. And just as a shameless self-promotion, here are my other two custom Titans. And you can see Broadside, the Helicarrier Broadside. This guy is 29 inches, so he's enormous. He towers over the other Titans. And then Grandis is about the same size as Tidal Wave, and he's got very stumpy legs that I'm probably going to have to work on. So Grandis might end up being a little bit taller at the end of the day, but all of these Titans definitely just embarrass the Hasbro tidal wave. Okay, let's get a 360 of my tidal wave. My turntable's barely keeping it together, but you can see that this guy, he's got a lot of, I would say, like Bayformer kind of aesthetic to him. He's got some layered armored pieces. He's made out of realistic vehicles. Okay, the turntable's really struggling. But yeah, so I would say this is something more like a movie aesthetic compared to the Hasbro tidal wave, which is of course much cleaner looking. It doesn't have a lot of greebles and interesting little details that are eye-catching. It definitely adheres more to the video game or the cartoon aesthetic. It's just a lot more simple and more streamlined. So as far as which one is better as far as aesthetic goes, I would say that it's probably a toss-up. It just depends. Do you like more cartoon and anime style, or do you prefer like a more realistic, gritty style, or something that has like a lot of more mechanical details? So it's really, I would say that's a tie. And as far as like the proportions go, obviously the proportions of the Hasbro tidal wave are just perfect. He looks very Frankenstein. Mine has admittedly some awkward proportions because the arms are maybe a little bit short compared to the rest of the body. So as far as proportions, I would probably give it to the original Hasbro as far as that goes. Okay, so I guess the next thing we'll talk about is just the articulation. Basically anything that Hasbro can do, my custom can do. So his head's on a double ball joint, so you can get some really good looking down poses where you could actually see him. Even if you're on the ground level, you can still see his face. And the Hasbro does that too by having this hinge right here, so he can basically look over his chest. And then he has really excellent looking up pose. And then of course, because mine's on ball joints, he can get a really excellent looking up pose if there was something taller than him somehow. And then he does have these ball joint shoulders, which are a little bit, I probably over loosened just a little too much because they are a little bit saggy. And then he does have this ratchet that makes his arm go outward. He does have a bicep swivel 360 degrees. He does have elbow bend. If you move this panel, you can get the 90 degrees very easily. You do get wrist articulation. You get opening, closing fingers, and a ball joint thumb, so you can get some good looking fists. You get, mine also has an opening and closing mouth, which I would count as a point of articulation. Very unnecessary, but it's good for holding his pipe. He does have a waist pivot because this guy was made from the Ark, and then he does have pretty extreme ankle tilts, and then he's got universal joints for the hips, so you can get really crazy spread leg pose. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but it's possible. And as a new feature, I did give this guy, I worked very hard, and I did give this guy knee joints, which he did not have previously. So now we can get some good looking poses of him reaching the ground and trying not to fall over. Okay, there you go. So there's it takes a little bit of work, but you can get him. His knees are all bent up, and it looks like he's kneeling down to pick something up. So that was a lot of work, but it paid off, and now he has legitimate knees, which he never had before. So yeah, as far as articulation goes, I would definitely call that a draw. So let's talk about the next thing I would say is like build quality. So this guy, he's pretty sturdy, but he is amateur made, of course. So he definitely doesn't hold up to this guy, which you could probably really just throw on the floor and not expect anything to break. This guy, it would be devastating if you threw him on the floor. Like something would definitely break off that's not meant to, or ball joints would come popped out of their sockets. But yeah, I really can't compete with a Hasbro quality toy. I would say this guy's quality feels more like Masterpiece. It's got like that squishiness to it because there's so much engineering built in, and because there's so much articulation that he's just not as rigid as a nice toy, which no matter how you pose it, he's just going to sit tight no matter what. So so for build quality, I would definitely say that the Hasbro is better made, but that's not surprising. Let's talk about the accessories. Actually, before we do that, I want to talk about their head sculpts. So here's my custom. And then here's the Hasbro Titan. And I think mine captures a lot of the Tidal Wave look. I really like his boxy helmet and his flat cannon ears. This guy doesn't really have those flat cannons, so I think that's kind of a shame. And then of course mine has the light up eyes, so I think in terms of gimmicks, I think that this guy has the better gimmicks because this guy doesn't have anything. His mouth doesn't even open, even though it looks like it should. This one, he's got opening, closing mouth. So I would say in terms of gimmicks that my custom probably wins on that front because he's got light up eyes. And this guy's gimmick is, of course, he's got those little drones that come out of his body. So he gets like a little miniature version of himself with these little vehicles. And not to underplay it, but I mean, this gimmick, of course, combines with Megatron, so that's something else that it does. But honestly, I think the Megatron combination is pretty poor. So I think the gimmick is really not really worth anything. And I would count these as accessories. So this guy's accessories is that he's got, of course, these mini vehicles that imitate him. And if you saw in my other video, I already customized these so that they could become a small robot to imitate Tidal Wave even better. But I think this gimmick, just as it is, with these three vehicles that combine with Megatron, I think this gimmick is pretty dumb. It's pretty lame, but at least it's something extra. If he didn't do that, then this figure would be even more plain. So I guess it's nice that they included this little gimmick. but I think these accessories are kind of junk. Compared to my Tidal Wave, he comes with all these, like the antennas and things that you can just peg on, make him look more realistic. He comes with these little jets, which are in scale. And then he comes with a couple other missile launchers, whatever. So he's got all these little extra little bits, helicopters, antennas. So these are pretty good accessories. As you saw earlier, he comes with his little pipe that he can put in his mouth. So that's a pretty cool accessory. Giant submarine anchor. So it turns into a submarine. He can wield it in his hand. Here he is holding his anchor, smoking his pipe. Here he is like holding the anchor behind his back. Maybe on his shoulder would be better. Okay, and here he is holding his anchor, and I think that really just completes his look. He looks so intimidating, ready to just slam this down on somebody. Yeah, it looks really cool. Okay, and as I get them in their vehicle modes, I do have to give Hasbro credit since he does have a base mode. This isn't the one that is in the instructions. I think this is better. So it's like a gun emplacement in the front, and then he's got these walls here to protect, I don't know, any like robots that want to hide behind these walls would be pretty cool. So the Hasbro version does have a base mode. Mine doesn't. I mean, Microwave can basically just live in there, and then there's these gun towers too. I haven't really figured it out, but pretty good base mode. It definitely adds to the play value, so credit where credit's due. That's a point. Okay, and then here's the Hasbro in his vehicle mode, and he's pretty cool, of course. Everything looks nice and cohesive. He looks like one solid starship. And then one kind of annoying thing I realized is that these wings are facing backwards because they're facing the correct direction for his drone, but that means they're facing backwards for his combined mode, which is a little ridiculous. But it's kind of cool that he's got these little drone vehicles that can deploy out of him. And one thing that the Hasbro does do better than mine is that he's got these, well, I guess we'll go over that in his individual vehicle modes. But one thing that mine is better at is this guy does require parts forming. All three components have to be transformed individually. This doesn't even use the same joints that the shoulders use. So a lot of cheating up here. And then the leg cheating, they actually could have made it so that these legs would just attach right here. It would just require like a panel right here to open up. So it was just maybe like a cost-cutting measure, but they actually could have made the legs integrated the whole time. Okay, and this guy was very difficult to transform. Yeah, you better set aside some time if you're going to transform this guy. He takes a while, but he can be entirely transformed without any parts forming. Well, actually, there is like a little bit. Well, actually, if you separate him into his other vehicles, there is some parts forming, and I'll go over that in a second. But here's his overall look, which I think is pretty good. I want you to notice that I put in these little turbines on his wings, and he's got much larger wings than the Hasbro one. We'll do a comparison in a second, but you can see he basically just looks like a floating city. He looks so amazing with all his little windows. And here he is with all the little planes and the antenna, radars, whatever's going on. And here he is with like a mini con on his deck, so you could see how that scales. And then of course, when we got like a core class figure, it looks like this. You've probably seen this in my other review of this guy before he was completed. But yeah, he's very gigantic, so we'll compare him with the Hasbro version. And then I just want to note, like, picking him up, he's pretty stable for the most part. His nose cone does need some extra support. But yeah, the whole thing can be picked up and like flown around, which is pretty good. And there we go. And we can see how they both look together. And you can see, of course, the Hasbro's a little bit smaller compared to my custom. I guess we could technically put the Hasbro on top. There you go. So Hasbro can ride on top of my Tidal Wave. But yeah, here it is, just showing off the best I can. So like a 3/4 view, I think that looks pretty epic. But yeah, pretty solid vehicle mode. Here's all his kibble on the bottom. Looks a little rough for sure. But yeah, again, two very different aesthetics. Okay, before I disassemble this guy, this is what the small planes look like on his deck. So they scale pretty well with his aircraft carrier too. And then I did disassemble his arm here. And yeah, there's definitely enough room that there could have been an elevator that just like lowered a Minicon in and out of his bicep. It would have definitely fit. And like an actual Minicon size, not just like that tiny one the original figure came with. So I told you I was going to tell you about the parts forming. So the parts forming is this, that his thigh opens up, and I'm probably going to put a hinge right here so that it'll just hinge open. But this is how he connects to his torso. So a lot like the Hasbro version is it has a thigh connection instead of a waist connection. But yeah, here's the hovercraft mode, and you just basically peg everything together. Yeah, here's the hovercraft mode, and basically, technically he does have like a little bay in here where all his feet parts go. So you could put like a little robot in here, but you just close up these ramps, and they close in pretty tidily. So I think his hovercraft mode is much improved since the last time you saw this guy. His wings fold up in the back, and I really like that his turbines become his hover engines. And then he's got the little feet. But yeah, you can fit small robots like in these two compartments here. But yeah, that's the hovercraft, and you can see compared to the Hasbro hovercraft he is, of course, a lot bigger. The Hasbro hovercraft can fairly sit on top of this one. They are actually, mine's not much bigger than this one. And then this hovercraft, I think, kind of fails because it's got like this really weird ramp in the front. I think maybe it's more like a submarine. I'm not sure what they're going for. But the other thing that's nice about the Hasbro one is that these decks can open. So you can get this mode from like the original toy where you get like a troop transport, which is pretty cool. There's no chairs in here. There'll probably be like a third-party kit that'll make that. That'll make some chairs that go down. Yeah, this guy really sucks. I don't know why. He just like does not want to peg together. These things are constantly falling out. This guy is easily like the worst vehicle on the Hasbro. Okay, and then we'll get into the pontoon destroyer. So it's like two destroyer ships put together basically, and that's what it looks like. And I think this guy turned out pretty nicely. It's a little bit garbled right here, but everything pegs together. He's nice and solid. So he feels pretty good. And you can see he's got all the destroyer details. So he looks very threatening. And I actually learned from the Hasbro version, I put his entire hips back here. Originally, all of this was in the hovercraft, but it actually does look a lot better back here. And it helps the hovercraft not be such a mess. And then you can see that mine is a lot bigger than the Hasbro version. The Hasbro version looks, of course, very cute and cartoony and stocky, and he doesn't even really look like a destroyer, but I think that is, I'm assuming from all the guns and the batteries, I think that's what they were going for in the bridge right here is kind of like this section. So yeah, very different take on that. Of course, like I said, the aesthetics are very different. You can see on the bottom of mine, I had to make this rail system, and that's how I solved the issue of parts forming the shoulders. So it took a lot of extra little work just for something that's kind of pointless. And let's bring out the final component, and that's the aircraft carrier. And you can see, of course, the Hasbro one fits very nicely on top of this one. And he's got like a tiny little bridge compared to this one, which has a bigger bridge, and you can put some like Titan or Headmaster figures in there. It's very small space, but there's another compartment in there. And this one's pretty rough looking. Like, I don't know why I had such a hard time getting these panels to line up, but they did not line up very well. But yeah, he's pretty clean looking. So he is a very cool aircraft carrier. And if you've noticed, all three of the Titans I made, all three of them are aircraft carriers. So I just have a thing for aircraft carriers, apparently. But the other nice thing about this guy is even though he's already a lot bigger, the other thing you can do is you can fold out these panels down here. So they telescope out, and now you've got the full-size aircraft carrier. So now you have the entire rear deck, and there's this little strut here that helps hold it up. Otherwise, it's pretty saggy. So there's now the back deck, and now it's even more giant compared to the Hasbro version. Whoa. So yeah, I think that turned out very nicely. Of course, it's got a lot of little gaps and holes back here, but I think you can still appreciate that the effect is pretty cool. Of course, we should have an honorable mention for our submarine, which just turns into an anchor. These become the anchor parts, and this becomes the shaft of the anchor so he can hold it. So that's the whole operation for this guy right here. And here's all the components together to make the entire Dark Fleet. And I think the cool thing about this is that each component is about the same size. The hovercraft is definitely the biggest of the bunch, but they all look like they scale pretty well with each other, especially these two ships are almost exactly the same size, which is pretty awesome. And then this guy is mostly just wider, but yeah, I think they all look really excellent together. And yeah, I guess that really shows off how far we've come. This guy, I made this guy before the Titan tidal wave was ever even really announced, and before they showed images or anything. I just started to work on this guy pretty much a little bit right after the art came out, and it's been a long road, but I really enjoy this figure. I like his aesthetics a lot. I think the realistic aesthetic is very cool, but at the end of the day, this is just not got the